Hi everybody, this is my second tutorial on using the 3D workspace within Photoshop. Now what I've got here to begin to start showing some more tools within the program is I've got a document open and it's got two layers on here. The background layer is actually already an existing 3D layer, which I'll get to later, but what we can see here is I've got a regular layer and filled with my foreground color, which is just a pale green. Now there's a couple of different ways that I can actually start to extrude this out into 3D. First one, and probably most obvious, is I can go up to 3D and I can create a new 3D extrusion from the selected layer. Now what that'll do is it's actually going to punch out my layer and it's going to just extrude my layer out into, as we can see, 3D, but because my layer was rectangular, it's just given me a 3D extrusion with my foreground color on the front, and it's a prism. But that's probably not something that is entirely useful, but it's just going to throw the whole layer out. So what we'll do here is we're actually going to come back into our layers palette, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to switch my backgrounds off again. Now something that we can do here that's really quite neat is I can actually start to paint and create some more organic shapes. Now what I might do is I'll start to just paint and create some generic shape. Now what I'll then do is I'm going to make a selection of that area. I'm going to edit and fill that in with my foreground color. So rather than having the entire layer filled with the color, I'm starting to use something that I've created which is more of an irregular shape. Now whilst Photoshop's not exactly designed for CAD and real 3D design, we can do a lot with 3D by making 3D extrusions of irregular and regular shapes. Now again, like I showed you before, I can go 3D and I can go new 3D extrusion from the selected layer, or I can simply come over into my palettes and I've got those options over in there as well. Now all I do is click on 3D extrusion and click create. Now what that's done, that's actually given me a 3D extrusion of that irregular shape. Now that's something that's becoming a little bit more user-friendly. Now what it immediately does is it extrudes it out in a completely square manner. Now what I've got the option to do now, as well as like I spoke about in my previous tutorial with scaling and moving and rotating, I've also got the option to pop over here into this little tool here which is called cap. Now what that gives me the option to do is change the shape that it's extruded out into. Now it's going to keep my cross section the shape that I originally drew, but what it gives me the option to do is change the angle and the depth of my extrusion, as well as changing the shape of the face layer. So what I can do here, I might choose the contour that I want the face to be. Let's choose something nice and round for the purposes of this. I'm then going to increase the strength, and we can see that it's begun to become quite bulbous and round. I might then come back into the depth of the extrusion, because I don't really want something that's completely square along the sides. So what I'm actually going to do is come back to my extrusion depth, and I'm actually going to decrease my extrusion depth. I don't really want it to be anything at all. So what I do, at the moment it's 1.94 centimeters. I'm going to bring that right back down, and I want it to be something quite slim. Now at the moment that's given me that bulbous front, but it's still kept a flat back on it. So what I can do, I can come back over into my cap tool, and rather than it just being the front, I can change it to the front and the back. Now what that's going to give me is the option to actually contour and change the strength of both the front and the back of the shape. Now what that gives me is a preview up here, but it also gives me a front and back inflation of that shape. Now what we can begin to do with that is, well, anything that we really like, and we can begin to create these really unusual shapes fairly simply by drawing a cross section to begin with. Now I think that's probably still a little bit too deep in the extrusion, because I don't really want it to have any flat section on the side there, so I'm going to pop back over into my extrusion depth, and I'm actually just going to manually type 0 into there, and it's going to bring it back down to being completely 0, and that gives me a fairly organic blob that we can begin to work with and attach other shapes to.